but let him ask in faith, with no doubting. This verse flows directly out of verse 5, where James invites us to ask God for wisdom, because God is generous, not stingy. He gives freely. He's not shaming us for asking. But now James turns the spotlight, not onto God's character, but to ours. He says, let him ask in faith, without doubting. Now pause here. This isn't a condition in a mechanical sense or a transactional sense. James isn't saying, if you meet this requirement, then God will give. He's not laying out a formula. He's exposing a deeper spiritual reality. A divided person isn't in a position to receive or respond rightly to anything God gives, not because God is unwilling, but because they are unreceptive. That's the tension James is naming. And this tension doesn't just apply to asking for wisdom. It becomes a thread that runs throughout the whole letter. Verse 1:8, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Verse 2:17, faith without works is dead. 3:10, blessing and cursing coming from the same mouth. 4:8, purify your hearts, you double-minded. Now, when James talks about doubting here, he's not warning against sincere struggle. He's not shutting the door to those who are wrestling. He's calling out divided loyalty. The Greek word here for doubt, it doesn't mean emotional uncertainty. It carries this idea of internal conflict, a kind of split in judgment and allegiance. It's the person who asks God for help, but they're clinging to their own way and to their own terms of how he can help. Or the one who wants the gift, but not the giver's leadership, who seeks wisdom, but resists surrender. And James will name this person in verse 8, double-minded. Literally, the word here means double-souled. It's a term James likely coined himself, found nowhere else in ancient Greek literature before this. And it's telling, because it names a condition we all understand. One foot in God's kingdom, one foot in our backup plan. Praying to God while still reserving veto power. This isn't about introspective anxiety. It's not about whether you feel 100% confident every time you pray. This is about a deeper reality, a life aligned toward God. So what's James doing here? He's setting up a contrast, a mirror really. On one side, God, whole, generous, unwavering. On the other side, the doubter, divided, unstable, pulled in two different directions. And it started back in verse 5. James describes God as the one who gives generously to all without reproach. That word generous is more than just quantity. The Greek word carries this sense of sincerity, singleness, integrity of intent. God doesn't just give with mixed motives. He doesn't pull back while pretending to bless. He doesn't shame you while saying he loves you. As Douglas Moo puts it, wisdom is something a gracious God is anxious to give to those who ask. And as Calvin puts it, and I'll paraphrase here, God doesn't demand from us what's beyond our strength. He's ready to help, if we'll ask. So let us learn to ask him for the power to do what he commands. So James gives us this beautiful vision of a God who is entirely aligned in heart and action. He's not divided. He's not reluctant. He's not holding back. But then James turns the question on us. Are we approaching this kind of God with the same singleness? If God is whole in his generosity, are we whole in our asking? Or are we still hedging, still reserved, still wondering if we want wisdom or just the outcome? James is pressing into a hard truth. Divided loyalty disrupts communion, not because God is unwilling, but because we're split. We don't just need to ask. We need to ask with a heart that's aligned, open, and surrendered. Because wisdom, real wisdom, is not just something you receive. It's something you walk in. And a divided soul doesn't walk straight. Now this theme James introduces about wholehearted trust isn't isolated. It's echoed in the teaching of Jesus, and it's connected to other parts of Scripture that help us understand what real living faith looks like. His words echo the teaching of Jesus, especially when it comes to how we approach God. In Matthew 21 and 22, Jesus says, "If you have faith and do not doubt, whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive." Mark 11:24, "Whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." James is clearly picking up on the same language here. Faith, asking, not doubting. Now, Jesus here in these scriptures, he doesn't define doubting the exact same way that James will. He doesn't explicitly call it divided loyalty, but he does root asking in something deeper, trust in the character of God. That's why in Matthew 7, Jesus says, "Ask and it will be given to you." He immediately follows with this, "Which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask?" That's the context Jesus gives for asking. You're not begging a reluctant deity. You're coming to a good Father, a willing giver. And that lines up perfectly with James 1:5, doesn't it? A God who gives generously and without reproach. A God who is not playing games. A God whose heart is already turned towards you in grace. That's the posture Jesus and James are both inviting us into. Now, I want to take a short detour here, because this is where a lot of people get stuck. They read ask in faith without doubting, and they panic. They replay their anxiety. They beat themselves up every time they question. And they convince themselves that because they're not 100% confident, God must be withholding. He's holding back from them. So let's be clear about something. The Greek word James uses for doubting means to waver, to be internally divided, to be at odds with yourself. Paul uses the same root word in Romans 4:20. When he writes about Abraham, he did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God. Now wait a second. Because if you've read Genesis, you know Abraham had his moments. He laughed at the promise. He tried to force it through Hagar. He questioned how it would all happen. And Paul knew that story. So when he says Abraham didn't waver, he doesn't mean Abraham never questioned. He means Abraham never turned away. He stayed in relationship. He kept moving forward. He trusted even in weakness. That's the point James is making too. He's not condemning the struggler. He's not writing off those who are weary. He's warning against a heart that's split, that wants God to help without submitting to God's way. So if you're someone who sincerely wants to follow God, if your heart is open, even if your emotions are shaky, that's faith, and that's enough. Jesus even said, if you have faith like a mustard seed, it's not about how big it is. It's about whether it's alive. If it moves you toward God, if it's willing to ask, to act, to follow, God meets you in it. Now, after that momentary detour, let's return to James's voice. He moves to giving us a picture of what happens when our trust remains divided. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. James doesn't just describe the doubter, he paints them. It's the image of a wave tossed by wind, pushed, pulled, unstable, unanchored. This isn't a beautiful ocean rhythm. It's the chaos of instability, motion without direction, energy without center. In an ancient thought, especially in Jewish writings like Phileo, the sea symbolized just that: restlessness, wandering, disorder. James is saying that's what a double-minded life looks like, pulled by conviction, then by convenience, drawing toward truth, then back toward comfort, asking God, but not really surrendering. And this image isn't just poetic, it's diagnostic. Because the person James describes isn't just unsettled in prayer, they're unstable in all their ways. The Greek word here for unstable means inconsistent, disordered, reactive, a life without an anchor, a soul without a center. And that's James's warning. He's not condemning weakness. He's exposing duplicity, a kind of spiritual chaos that shows up not just in prayer, but in decision-making, relationships, even in speech. It's the opposite of what he's been pointing us towards since verse 2. Endurance, maturity, wholeness. God gives with undivided intent. Are you asking with a whole heart? Because without that kind of loyalty, even prayer becomes a tug of war. Not because God is unwilling, but because we're not really positioned to receive. So what is James really saying here? He's not warning against emotional struggle. He's not telling you that God only answers perfect people with flawless confidence. He's naming a deeper issue, divided loyalty. This kind of doubt isn't confusion, it's spiritual hesitation. It's asking God for help while resisting his way. It's wanting wisdom, but only on your terms. James says that doesn't work, because asking in faith isn't about getting every detail right. It's about coming to God with a posture that says, I trust you. I want your way. I'm surrendered. Think of faith like sitting in a chair. Faith is like leaning your full weight on something. Your full weight on something you believe will hold you. You can't halfway sit. You either trust the chair or you don't. And if you're unsure, maybe you ease into it slowly because you've been hurt before, but eventually you sit. You have to surrender to fully sit. That's faith. It's not the size of your confidence. It's the direction of your trust. In verse 7, James is going to explain why this matters. What happens when that kind of surrender is missing? But for today, here's the invitation. Don't hedge your asking. Don't live split. Bring your whole self and rest your trust fully on the one who never fails.